Today on Locked On Knicks, we dive into why the Knicks are still championship contenders, but why their depth issues could ultimately keep them from getting to the ultimate prize.
You are Locked On Knicks, your daily New York Knicks podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Hey, what's up, guys? I'm Gavin Schall, and I'm a credentialed media member covering the NBA, and of course, the Saturday host of the Locked On NBA podcast. And this is Locked On Knicks, your daily podcast on the New York Knicks, where you can join thousands of other Knicks fans getting unique insight on your favorite team 5 days a week. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. On today's episode, I'm joined by XJ, the co-host of the Hot Hand Theory podcast, and we're going to dive deep on why the Knicks are Tier 1 title contenders, just how real their winning streak was, and how the Knicks can best resolve their depth issues. So you probably saw part one, which was is going to get confusing, but actually the second part we recorded, which was the Thunder preview. And then before that, we dove deep on the Knicks depth issues. So we're talking about that today. We recorded it before the Thunder game, before the Bulls game, but I think after those two games, our conversation is arguably even more relevant. So I think you're really going to like this one, and then we will get you the Bulls episode tomorrow morning. But first, I want to remind you that today's episode is brought to you by our good friends over at FanDuel. From big upsets to game-winning drives, the NFL playoffs are better with FanDuel, and new customers can bet $5 and get $200 in bonus bets guaranteed, win or lose. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. And I also remind you that your favorite podcast now has a newsletter. That's right. We're introducing the Locked On Knicks daily newsletter, the one-stop shop for ultimate team and league coverage delivered right to your inbox. Sign up for free now at LockedOnDaily.com. That's LockedOnDaily.com, and start your day with the all-new, I can't emphasize this enough, free Locked On Knicks newsletter. You get writing from Alex and I, our team of national writers at Locked On, and of course, Josh Lloyd with the best in fantasy basketball. And remember, if you want to help grow the show, subscribe on YouTube, hit that notifications bell, subscribe on your favorite podcast platform of choice, and comment your thoughts on the Knicks depth issues. Without further ado, let's get into it with XJ. All right, guys, as promised, we are lucky enough to be joined by a Hall of Fame guest. I'm just going to say he's earned the right at this point. My buddy XJ, he's the co-host of the fantastic Hot Hand Theory podcast. It takes a lot for me to listen to another Knicks podcast because it's all I'm consuming. And at a certain point, once it's your job, you're like, all right, I want some time off, but I will walk around downtown Phoenix. I'll listen to the Hot Hand Theory every single week. Makes you a smarter Knicks fan, and of course, a contributor over at Knicks Film School as well. XJ, welcome back. First of all, how's everything going, man? You doing well?
It's really good. We've talked a lot about how, I'm a longtime listener of Locked On Knicks and you and Alex. And so to get that back from you, I'm like, you know what? That does feel really good when you're people that you respect and appreciate listen to your stuff too. It's like, no, that's like the highest form of flattery. So I really appreciate that. Yeah. Otherwise, I'm doing really good, Gavin. How about you?
I'm doing good, man. I was telling you off air, new puppy, traveled cross country from North Carolina, lost my bag. So it's been a full week, little sleep deprived, but doing good and feeling very good about our New York Knicks. As we'll talk about, they've won 9 in a row, 14 of their last 16. I'm going to just start as broad as possible because I unless I'm just blacking out and missing it. The last time you were on, because I went on your show in the middle, but the last time you were on this podcast, was right after the Towns trade. And the headline of that podcast was why Karl-Anthony Towns makes the Knicks championship contenders. He's been incredible. The Knicks, at least of late, have been really exceptional. So I want to know, does your opinion still hold true on that? Do you put the Knicks in that tier? Are you more optimistic? Are you less optimistic? 30 plus games in the season? Where are you at?
I would say it's going exactly according to plan, honestly. So far. I think I'm the same as optimistic as I was. I think that's because I was very optimistic to begin with. If we recall that podcast, I just have always been a fan of Karl-Anthony Towns at the 5 and what he does to an offense and the kinds of avenues that are available to you when you have the best big man shooter of all time playing at the center position. It's just such a unique advantage, even in the modern NBA where we're seeing teams like the Celtics shoot 53s per game. Even in that same paradigm, it gives you such a unique advantage having a guy who is that exceptional, who is that big, who can shoot from that far out. And that just has everything falling into the place for the Knicks. So to me, I'm just as optimistic as I was, which was highly optimistic. I would say, though, I do think there are a couple other contenders who might be a little bit, just one notch higher than the Knicks for me right now. But, we'll see how things go for the rest of the season.
I think it would be fair to, like, here's how I would tier it. I would say Boston in their own category. I think below them, Oklahoma City in their own category. And then I would say the Knicks, the Cavs, the Mavs, the Grizzlies, all in that tier 3. Does that line up with what you think, or where would you put the Knicks in that pecking order? Or am I missing a team that you think should be in there as well?
No, that's pretty close to where I'm at. I would have, and I stated this before the season started, I'd actually have OKC ahead of Boston.
Wow. Okay.
I think they're in the same tier. I don't think there's like a big tier break between them, but I do have OKC at the top for me. And I'm sure we'll get into why as the Knicks have this big matchup coming up with them. But I would say like OKC, Boston, tier 1, and tier 2. I would have that ensemble of teams, but I would have the Knicks at the top of that tier as well, above the Cleveland Cavaliers.
Gotcha. We can get into it. I think the difference to me, I've talked about it not so much in this podcast, but a little bit on Locked On NBA, is I think OKC, and to be clear, they have the assets to go out and get this guy. They're one shot creator away relative to Boston, who just has 5 guys on the floor at all times who can pass, dribble, shoot, and all defend their butts off, which obviously Oklahoma City checks that box. If they went out and got someone, I don't know if he's available, but someone like a Norm Powell type guy, that would push them up a little bit for me. But I think where some people might be listening and saying, hey, we're just as good as Boston, right? We're half a game behind them. Oklahoma City, screw them. Like, Jalen Brunson's better than Shea. Yeah, maybe you're getting a little homerish, like when you go to that territory. But the merit behind that is what I mentioned before, that they've won 9 in a row, 14 out of 16, and nominally on paper about as hot as any team in the NBA right now. And I was trying to sit there and think, like, all right, why does it not quite feel like last January, where I believe you too, if I remember correctly, we're like kind of puffing our chests out and saying, you know what, I think we can play with Boston. Like, I wouldn't have called the Knicks favorites at that point, but like, I would have given them, I don't know, 35% chance of winning that series. And I don't quite feel that way yet. I don't quite feel like they're on an Oklahoma City level. And the simplest reason why is the schedule. And I mapped it out. So over the last 16 games, the Knicks have the 3rd best defense and the 4th best offense in basketball. The defense number obviously is particularly significant because that was our biggest concern, where the Knicks were closer to about 20th before this stretch. So I'm like, all right, do they actually play any good offenses over the last 16 games? The answer is a very definitive no. Unless I missed something, they have played one offense that is average or better. That is the Atlanta Hawks, who have the 15th best offensive rating in basketball. They have not played a top 14 offense in the NBA over that 16-game stretch. So you have to put a major asterisk next to that defensive rating. I'm like, all right, have they been scoring on good defenses? Not so much. They've played, again, unless I missed someone, 2 top 15 defenses over that 16-game stretch. Now, the offense, I think we know is real based on what they were doing early season. They were having just as much success when they had one of the tougher schedules in the NBA than this current stretch. Defensively, though, you could argue that they haven't really played teams that can pick at their weak points. And then the only other note I've thrown in there is they've enjoyed extraordinary health so far this year. And I think I would bet, I couldn't find a website to pull the numbers on this, but I would bet their starting lineup is probably the healthiest of any team in the league, which is a slight surprise, particularly on the OG Anunoby front. So those are just a couple of things I would say if I were to poke holes in the idea that the Knicks are a tier 1 contender. But like, this is a very broad question, so feel free to zoom in on any specific area you want. Like, how real are these last 16 games is what I'm ultimately getting at.
Yeah, I mean, I think you make all the points I probably would have made. I think that the Knicks, just the reality that they've gotten to work out some things against really weaker teams. And I think I think it'll benefit them, because I do think we've seen some things we haven't seen earlier in the season, some playmaking opportunities for Josh Hart and Mikal Bridges, things like that we haven't seen really deployed earlier. And they've been able to do this against weaker teams. But at the same time, they are weaker teams, and you really summarized it exactly perfectly, in my opinion. They haven't played a top offense or even a top half of offense in the entire league over this stretch, and the defenses have not, defense, and then the offenses haven't been good either. So I just think, I do believe 2 elite wings can offset a weaker rim protecting 5. That is something I genuinely believe and think is basically the foundational philosophy that allowed the Knicks to go out and get Karl-Anthony Towns, because they have to know that that's going to work. And I think it will. I think we've seen bounce back from Mikal Bridges defensively, who had been struggling earlier in the earlier part of the season. So all of those things give me great optimism. But in terms of like actually doing it on the court against really good defenses and the Knicks defeating really good defenses, like we just haven't seen that. And so I think that's why it makes this OKC game so critical, because this is the great defense in the league right now. So, I'm really excited for that.
All right, guys, next on Locked On Knicks, we're going to tell you why it is well past time Tom Thibodeau starts putting the starters' health over getting as many regular season wins as possible. That next. But first, we want to tell you about our good friends over at Prizepicks. Basketball season is heating up, and there's no better way to get real money action while watching your favorite NBA stars than with Prizepicks. Whether you're a diehard fan or just love some friendly competition, Prizepicks makes it easy and fun to turn your basketball knowledge into cash. Here's how it works. Pick more or less on at least 2 players for a shot to win up to 1,000 times your cash. Think LeBron's going to drop 30, or maybe Luka's getting more than 8 assists. Prizepicks lets you make predictions and put your money where your mouth is in just 60 seconds. I've been using Prizepicks all week, and let me tell you, it is addictive. Last week, I picked Jason Tatum for more than 29 points and Anthony Edwards for more than 25 points. That's the kind of action I'm talking about. And with Prizepicks Flex Play option, even if one of my picks doesn't hit, I can still double my money. Plus, once I hit, I get my money fast, sometimes as quick as 15 minutes. It's honestly the best way to keep games exciting. Now is the perfect time to join. Download the app today and use code LOCKEDONNBA to get $50 instantly when you play your first $5 lineup. That's right. No need to win to get the bonus. It's guaranteed. Prizepicks, run your game. Yeah, I am as well. And I think I would, if I were to just put 3 broad areas of concern, I think it's offensively, how do they deal with switches? And I know that some of you guys addressed a little bit on this week's hot hand theory. Defensively, how do they protect Cat? And third, is there enough depth there? The one number I didn't mention in all that is the Knicks are last in the NBA in bench scoring, and they're not last by like, oh, well, they're like half a point back of the Lakers. No, they're 5 points worse in terms of bench scoring than any other team in the league. And we can talk about if that's lack of talent or lack of opportunity, but I don't know if you want to just go through them one by one and rank them, but like out of those 3, like what would you say is the most glaring concern for you and the one this team, like whether through strategic shifts or trying to make a trade or just getting Mitchell Robinson back is kind of most like they most need to address?
I think it's tangentially the bench scoring, and I think that's as a result of the minutes issue. And I know there's been the minutes conversation that's come up, and obviously Knicks fans are very familiar with these conversations since Tom Thibodeau has been
to them, I would say. Fairly to some extent,
and sensitive, yes. And I think that the sensitivity makes sense from a narrative standpoint. I totally understand it. It's like the Knicks minutes are going to be more heavily scrutinized than other teams' minutes because of Tibbs and because of the reputation around Tibbs. So I totally get the sensitivity from that standpoint. But in terms of the practical reality, the Knicks are completely crushing the league in starters' minutes right now. And that is just the fact. They've also, like you mentioned, stayed extraordinarily healthy given the circumstances. Like, I think the only other team that could be comparable to them in terms of starting lineup health is the Cleveland Cavaliers, who the last time I had looked, it was like the Cavs top 4 had missed like 4 games and the Knicks top 4 had missed like 3 games or something like that. And not coincidentally, those are 2 of the better teams in the entire league right now. So health is going to be extremely important. And I think that is something that needs to be prioritized earlier than, sooner than later, because there were some, and, we were talking about this on Hot Hand Theory, and I went on a rant that I won't go on now, but there is peer-reviewed research that suggests that minutes per game is the primary risk factor for season-ending injuries, and does also suggest that the more minutes per game equals a greater likelihood of injury. And that is, early season minutes per game is something that just needs to be controlled if you want, at the end of the season, your guys to be healthy going into the playoffs. And if Knicks fans, if the organization believes in this team the way that we clearly do in terms of being a top 3 contender or at least a top 5 contender for the title, they are going to need to be healthy in the playoffs. We saw how important health is in the playoffs last season with the Knicks losing to, in my opinion, an inferior Pacers team just overall in terms of talent and skill level on the basis of health. And so they are going to have to increase that bench scoring, and the bench scoring will just increase by virtue of the bench being out there more often, whether it's the best bench in the league or not, so that is my main concern, I think, moving forward.
Yeah, I've taken the way I should start saying this is like I'm hesitant to go too deep on this topic because I feel like I take a lot of crap in the comments whenever I bring it up. The notion that the Knicks should be okay losing some regular season games if it means protecting the health of their starters. And I think part of that is people misconstruing it as me saying, well, that's why they lost last year. And I don't think that's I think it was generally bad luck last year. Like the Julius Randle injury was obviously a fluke injury. And that started kind of a downstream effect where then OG Anunoby was taking on more of a load and he got hurt. Maybe he got hurt just because OG Anunoby tends to get hurt, but then he gets hurt. And then all of a sudden, Bogey's not really healthy. And all of a sudden, like you go from like the deepest team in basketball and you make the consolidation trades that they made, which we agreed was a good move for OG Anunoby, to a team that did have to play everyone a ton of minutes, which wasn't Tom Thibodeau's fault last year, but it happened. And I don't think it's a coincidence then that OG pulls his hamstring and Josh eventually pulls a muscle in his chest, seemingly. And it just sort of feels like they're on a similar trajectory this year, except this year they have the benefit of controlling the situation and saying, hey, you know what, if we go over 14 games, let's just say we go 12-4 instead of 14-2, but everyone is playing, I don't know, let's just say Mikal's down to 36 minutes, OG's at 34, Jalen's at 35, which he, to be like, we should note in Tibbs' defense, Kat and Jalen, I think, have actually played pretty reasonable minutes. This is an issue about the wings, where last time I checked, Mikal was first in the NBA in minutes, Josh was fifth, OG was 10th. And I personally am willing to, again, I think this is the difference. I think they go 12-4 instead of 14-2. And some of the games you win by 25, you win by 7. I'm okay with that. Like to the point where he's like, before this game, before like injuries force his hand, he's benching Campaign. And I am far from the biggest Campaign defender in the world. The guy is incredibly erratic. And some nights he just takes stupid shots and just doesn't have it, but he can give you some stuff. And he's a competent backup NBA point guard. Play the guy 12 minutes, play Pacom Dadier, like 10 minutes. He's looked mostly fine defensively when he's been out there. I know he's not even with the team right now, but that's part of the issue to me. Like, I think it's a worthy trade-off. And based on your tweets and us interacting on Twitter, I think you're on the same page. They are absolutely playing with fire with OG Anunoby in particular, but I also think it's going to affect Josh down the road. And I think Mikal, as much as he's an Iron Man, you look at his like activity numbers and they're not always great. Like the rebounding, sometimes the steal rate, like those things have gone up and I'm continuing to watch them, but like he's an Iron Man. I just think you are pushing the limits, and obviously OG is where the worries kind of start and stop.
Yeah, I think that was really well said. And I would say I understand Knicks fans, like you mentioned the sensitivity, and I do understand it. And I do understand the idea that injuries can largely be random. Injuries can just happen to anyone at any time, and that is just something that occurs. And so seeing that, then you're like, well, if they're just going to happen anyway, why am I benching my guys? Why am I reducing minutes in order to lose 2 more games when they could possibly just get hurt anyway? It doesn't really it doesn't fully compute. I totally understand that. I think the difference is for me and what I'm hearing from you is like, we're sort of thinking about it more like probabilistically. Like, yes, you can reduce minutes. You can reduce Mikal's minutes to 30 minutes per game and he still get injured all of a sudden, like sure, by a freak injury. Of course that can happen. But we're talking about what is going to increase the probability of the Knicks winning a championship this season. And that would be those guys being healthy. And what is going to increase the likelihood of those guys being healthy if they just have a lower workload across the entirety of an 82-game grind of a season? Maybe it doesn't protect them from being injured. Maybe they get injured anyway. Maybe they play a ton of minutes and don't get injured anyway. All of those are possible outcomes that can absolutely happen, but we're just trying to bump up that percentage. If the Knicks have a 10% chance of winning a title, a 15% chance of winning a title, let's make that an 18% chance of winning a title, like that's that. And I think at the end of the day, that's what I care about as a fan of the team and as a fan of any team. That's what I would care about, is what is the percentage chance of winning a championship? And that's what I want to prioritize over anything.
And you should, like, a couple other factors here. you should presumably get more effective minutes when guys are playing less minutes because they're going to be a little fresher. And I think we saw OG in that 3 games in 4 nights. Like that was the worst. I think you said the exact same thing. That was the worst defense he played all year. Like those 2 Wizards games, particularly if I'm remembering correctly, the first one where he's just getting toasted by guys he should not really be getting toasted by guys not making a ton of plays. Gets 2 days off. Lo and behold, 5 stocks last night and looked incredible and totally like decimated Lauri Markkanen and what was like maybe like just one of like in a vacuum, one side of the ball, one of the better performances all season. Even if you don't believe that wear and tear leads to injuries, you're not going to get hurt on the bench, right? Those minutes you're on the bench, you're not going to have like what happened to Julius Randle where he flips over someone. It can't happen if you're on the bench. And the final thing, and maybe the most controversial part of this, where I'm curious your take on it. And again, people call this a loser mentality, and I'm open to debate on this one because I have not been a professional athlete. And I know some of it is mentality and establishing a mentality. And I kind of the same critiques last year where they won that, who was it? They were playing Chicago game to get the Sixers, presumably. They ended up getting the Sixers in the first round. But you do not want to be on the Boston Celtics side of the bracket, right? You want to stave it off as long as possible. You want to give them a chance to play the Cleveland Cavaliers and then maybe have, or sorry, not the Cavs, probably the Bucks or the Magic, and have an opportunity for one of those 2 teams to knock each other off. And maybe you get the 4 seed. And some people might argue like, all right, but then your path could be the Bucks, the Cavs, and the Celtics. To me, my ultimate concern is delaying Boston until the conference finals. So I'm okay losing a few more games. And if they just win anyways, that's fine too. But I'm not increasing injury risk just to set a date with what I think is the best team in the NBA in the second round, which is at least right now the trajectory the Knicks are on and the trajectory the Celtics are on. All right, guys, to wrap this one up with XJ, we're going to talk about how the Knicks maybe have not utilized the talents of their starters as much as possible and why they could be used to prop up the bench even more than they currently are. That next. But first, we want to tell you about our good friends over at FanDuel. From big upsets to game-winning drives, the NFL playoffs are better with FanDuel. Because right now, new customers can bet $5 and get $200 in bonus bets guaranteed. That's $200 in bonus bets, win or lose. The FanDuel app gives you everything you need for live bets, same-game parlays, and so much more. I still have my mind, Locked On Knicks host weird, on the NBA, and I was looking at finals odds. There was something about that Thunder game. I know Oklahoma City fans have been making fun of me in the comments for it, but that made me think more than ever the New York Knicks are legitimate championship contenders. So I pulled up the odds. The Celtics have the best at plus 200. Oklahoma City third at plus 350. The Knicks are plus 1,000. Should the Knicks have 5 times worse odds than the Boston Celtics? Maybe that's up for you to debate, but clearly the books like the Knicks. I like the Knicks. If you are a true believer, get those odds before the Knicks rip off another 10-game winning streak, and they get even lower at plus 1,000 right now for the New York Knicks to win the NBA championship. All you have to do is visit FanDuel.com today to join and get started with $200 in bonus bets. That's FanDuel.com. Make the playoff season unforgettable with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL.
So I think in this, I diverge from you a little bit here. And that's just because there's just too many variables at play. If I could think about it as far as like, you mentioned the 1 game scenario or something like that, like I can totally maneuver the chess pieces and control the outcome, I would be closer to you. For me, it's just, who knows what's going to happen? A guy gets injured, Boston falls out of the top, a Cab gets injured, he goes to Boston goes to number 1. You seem like you want to say something in response.
Yeah, so I was just going to, my broader point here is that that randomness is my point. Why win the 4 extra games then? Right?
Yeah,
is that just, unless you value home court that much, which maybe it is that valuable, like I think that is the only argument for it.
So I think we're closer than on the same page then, because yes, I also agree. It's like, I'm not going out of my way to do everything I can to win the 4 extra games to potentially get a matchup that I don't like. But to me, it's like, it's sort of inconsequential what the matchup is going to be. It's more about preserving the guys than to kind of make sure that you get the matchup you want, or make sure you're not getting a bad matchup or a bad route to the championship, because you don't know what that route's going to be. So all it is for me, I guess the focus is more about the health than it is about anything else, and everything else is sort of like inconsequential because you have much less control over that, I guess.
Yeah, and that's totally fair. And maybe what some people could say here is like we're diverging a little bit from the hard facts that the Knicks just don't have a lot of bench talent. And again, like I would argue, like part of what they did this summer in making their team, it's so weird to say top heavy because there is such a depth of skills in their starting five that can cover so much ground. I just sort of think they're misallocating that a little bit. And last night was a really good example of that. When you see with no Jalen Brunson's like, all right, look what Josh Hart could do in terms of creating extra offense, just given a few more possessions and say, hey, get a rebound and go, or run a pick and roll with Cat. Look how many different ways Karl-Anthony Towns can affect a basketball game offensively, right? Step back threes, being double teams with jump hooks, like leaning back on one foot, waiting for the double and throwing that like water polo pass to a cutter with one hand. I might have said it already, but like just winning a rebound defensively and like launching the ball 70 feet on a dime up the court, splitting double teams and getting to a hook shot, right? Like OG bullying smaller players, Mikal, transition layup after transition layup, threes, mid-range, like all these guys have a depth of skill. And I know you've really been on Hart handling the ball more, and particularly when teams post a really weak defender on him. I think the best way to get into that is, of course, you want some of that when Jalen's on the floor to spare him some wear and tear and also get him easier looks. And because he's such a good catch and shoot guy, but I also wouldn't mind like more bench heavy units and more time for, hey, Josh, like maybe less minutes, but we're going to put more of a load on you. Mikal, we're going to put a little bit more of a load on you. And let those guys shine and do what they do best and carry bench heavy lineups and elevate weaker players. And to me, like the argument to playing the bench more is not even an argument to saying like that the talent is so good on the bench, which I think we can all agree compared to past years, especially it's not right now. It's more of an argument that like you're not fully taking advantage of the talent you have on the rosters. And those guys can do more than you're asking them to do by babying them a little bit by only playing them with great players.
I think that's such a great point. Yeah, I definitely think you could really emphasize their skill sets a lot more. And the main person I think about that with is Karl-Anthony Towns. And, talking about the advantage that spacing at the five provides to you, if you stagger Brunson and Towns a little bit more, you put Towns really with any lineup, especially these lineups that have Deuce McBride and Cam Payne in it and Landry Shamet. Now it's like, well, you were trying to stop us with Jalen Brunson isolations. Now you're trying to stop us completely spread out with 40% shooters at every position. So now it's a whole different challenge for a defense to deal with. And maybe you're running up the score in the off Brunson minutes, like who knows? I think that you have so many different options to go to in terms of the skill sets from those guys that you mentioned. It's just about the way that you deploy them along with those bench players to kind of elevate them as much as possible. And I don't think the bench is like terrible or anything like that. I think there a lot of guys on the bench are playable. I think, I am not the biggest Cam Payne fan either, but he's been awesome from three this year, which makes him a threat. He's been a really gritty defender at times. I think Tyler Kolek can play basketball. Like I think he can play 5 minutes here and there if necessary, if you don't trust what Payne has that night. And I think, Landry Shamet has proven to be a solid player, and Deuce McBride is Deuce McBride. We know what he is, potentially a 6th man of the year candidate, as long as he's healthy. So I just think that you kind of got to just figure out how to make it work. Like regardless of if you think the bench is not great, you just kind of have to figure out how to make it work. And if you lose 2, 3, 4 more games on the season, so be it. I think that's better for the long run and the team's title chances.
And to your point, then those bench guys, if you do have an injury, you need to go to them in the playoffs to have a little bit more confidence because they've actually been playing all year. And I think weirdly enough, and I wanted to ask you about him specifically because I know you're a major fan. Like the one area I'll defend Tibbs is that I don't think Deuce has been quite as good as he was in the second half of last year. Like had that game against the Celtics where you're coming on after be like, all right, maybe he's just Dante DiVincenzo with like a better like point of attack defense. I mean, maybe not as much of a playmaker, but not to get too into the weeds. That's what he looked like the first night of the year, and then hasn't scored 20 points in a game since then. And there's a fine line there of chicken or the egg where it's like, all right, does Tibbs just have to trust him? And like on a night, part of it is that the Knicks haven't had many injuries, so there haven't been nights where he's gotten to play 35 minutes and really find a great rhythm. But he has been pretty spotty. I don't have the numbers right in front of me, but relatively inefficient December, and like to some extent the bench sort of lives and dies on him being really good, and I think he's just been a step below what the Knicks need to be title contenders right now.
Yeah, I think that's accurate. I think to me, and Jeff, my partner at Hot Hand Theory, had mentioned about how Deuce hasn't been playing that well and needs to kind of incentivize Tibbs to give him some more minutes to kind of offset this huge imbalance from starter to bench minutes. And I actually disagree with that. I think that he doesn't need to incentivize Tibbs. I think he just needs to play him. Like, I think that you just need to have Deuce McBride play out there. If Josh Hart was struggling, he would play. If OG Anunoby was struggling, which he has been at times this season so far, he would still play. If, Brunson and Cat, we don't see those guys struggle very often, but if they do, they're still going to play. If Deuce McBride struggles for 5, 6, 7, 10 games, play him. He is a guy that's important to your team. He's important to your title hopes because you need guys off the bench. You cannot just win with 5 guys going through the gauntlet of the playoffs, and he is going to be essential. So he needs to play through difficult stretches. He was struggling a bit and then played through that Washington game. He actually didn't start out that great and then got was it Washington? I don't know. It was a game recently where he was struggling and then had good shooting, but
I think it was the Wizards game where he started like 1 for 9 and then
it was the Wizards
game.
I think
it was the first Wizards game, if I'm remembering correctly.
There you go. Yeah. So yes, I think it was too. So yeah, I mean, you just got to play him through and just let him work through it and see what he has and see if he can work through a funk if he's in one potentially. So to me, I'm just playing him regardless of how he performs, and you're gonna go down with the ship because those are your guys. He's one of your top 6 guys, and you're gonna go down with those guys.
Yeah, I'm with you, and I just thought it was the Spurs game where he started 1 for 9 and then hit the 3 with 2 minutes left. But the point is, like, he has the balls to take that shot, and he has the skills to make it, which suggests he should be out there. And I should note, because I didn't initially, like, his defense this year has maybe been the best of his career. Like, I think B-Ball Index had a stat that he was like the 2nd best screen navigator in all of basketball, which obviously we've seen Mikal struggle with that at points this year. You have kind of an innate understanding of just how important that is. All right, guys, that is it for today's episode with XJ. Remember, even though this was, I know it's confusing. I'm sorry. Even though this one was released second, it was technically a part 1 of 2. So in case you missed it, you can go back and check out the preview episode we did of the Thunder game. It still is kind of relevant because they play the Thunder again on Friday, and you could see how much of what we said actually came to pass and how much is still interesting for that second game. If you're a little more forward looking, we'll have a Bulls recap on Monday, and then plenty of previews, plenty of game recaps to come this week. Until then, we'll talk to you very soon on the #1 Knicks podcast here at Locked On Knicks.